A single whispered secret could topple a throne more easily than 1,000 swords. The true power in medieval kingdoms did not always ride on horseback in shining armor. It moved silently in the shadows, through intricate networks of espionage that secretly steered the course of history. We know the stories of knights and castles, but we rarely hear about the master manipulators of information, the spies whose covert decisions won wars, secured successions, and forged fragile alliances. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how these hidden systems were the true architects of power, not just a side note to the past. How did a letter carried by a monk change the fate of an empire? What was the real price of a double agent's loyalty? This is the story of the shadow networks that built and broke kingdoms. What does it truly mean to hold power when no one knows your name? The game of shadows began not in the Dark Ages, but in the fading light of Rome. Emperors, besieged by threats from within and without, understood that control depended on knowing what your enemies planned before they acted. The Byzantine court perfected this art, weaving a web of informants and secret agents to sniff out conspiracies and maintain a fragile grip on a sprawling empire. When Rome finally crumbled, this crucial knowledge did not vanish. Instead, it was inherited by the new kingdoms rising from the ashes, rulers who quickly learned that brute force alone was a poor strategy for survival in a world fractured into 1,000 competing pieces. In this dangerous new landscape, foreknowledge became the ultimate currency. A king like Charlemagne, building his vast domain, relied on more than just his armies. His scouts and messengers were his eyes and ears, sent out not only to carry orders but to observe, to listen in marketplaces, and to gauge the loyalty of local chieftains. This was a crude intelligence apparatus, a far cry from the sophisticated networks to come, but it was profoundly effective. It marked a quiet revolution in the very nature of power. Suddenly, a ruler's strength was not just counted in the number of knights he could summon, but in the quality of the secrets he possessed. The stage was now set for these simple tools of observation to evolve into something far more deliberate and complex, transforming the whisper of a scout into the foundational whisper of an empire. This Byzantine system of control was far from random. It was a meticulously constructed machine, a true secret service operating with ruthless efficiency. At its center stood a single, powerful figure, the logothete of the drome. This was no ordinary bureaucrat. He was the empire's chief spymaster, managing a complex web that combined the imperial post, foreign diplomacy, and a sprawling network of covert agents. These agents, known as the agents in rebus, were the empire's eyes and ears. They were the ultimate multitaskers, moving openly as imperial couriers and diplomats while secretly gathering intelligence on everything from enemy troop buildups to the shifting loyalties of a distant governor. Their presence was a constant, silent reminder that the emperor's reach was long and his memory for disloyalty was longer. For the Byzantines, this was not a matter of choice but of survival. Their empire was a glittering jewel perpetually surrounded by enemies, and they knew that walls and armies were not enough. True defense began with knowing an enemy's plans before they did. This led to an arms race in information security. They developed sophisticated codes and ciphers, turning simple messages into unreadable puzzles for any intercepting hand. Their commitment to secrecy was absolute. Consider the legendary Greek fire, that terrifying incendiary weapon that could burn even on water. Its exact formula was a state secret of the highest order, protected by a veil of secrecy so dense that its composition was known to only a select few, with spies and informants tasked with ensuring it never fell into enemy hands. But the gaze of this network was not only turned outward. it also watched from within, monitoring the endless plots and ambitions that swirled around the imperial court itself. A whispered criticism, a suspicious alliance between powerful families, a governor growing too popular, all were noted and reported back to the logothete. This internal surveillance was the key to the emperor's personal security, a way to snuff out conspiracies before they could ever ignite into open rebellion. In this way, the Byzantine intelligence machine became the true bedrock of the empire's remarkable longevity. It established a powerful precedent, a blueprint for how a centralized state could wield information not just as a tool of war, but as the very foundation of its power and stability. This model of organized espionage would not remain confined to the East for long, its principles slowly seeping into the minds of ambitious rulers elsewhere. While the Byzantines perfected their art of courtly intrigue, a different kind of network was taking shape to the east. The Abbasid Caliphate, stretching from Spain to the edges of Central Asia, faced a unique challenge. How could one ruler possibly govern such an immense and diverse empire? The answer arrived on horseback in the form of the Barid. On the surface, this was a simple postal service, a network of roads and way stations designed to move messages with incredible speed. But its true purpose ran far deeper. Every rider and station master was more than a simple courier. They were a trained observer, an extension of the caliph's own senses. As they carried official decrees across deserts and mountains, their eyes were always open, noting the mood of the people, the conduct of local officials, and any whisper of discontent that could flare into rebellion. For caliphs like the famed Harun al-Rashid, the Barid was not a luxury, it was a vital artery. The letters it carried were important, yes, but the confidential reports sent back by its agents were what truly held the empire together. They provided a constant, real-time pulse of the realm, from the health of the harvest in Egypt to the ambitions of a governor in Persia. This system was a marvel of logistics, capable of delivering a message across thousands of miles in a matter of days. Yet its genius was in its dual function. The same infrastructure built for speed was also a perfect machine for surveillance. It proved that the most effective spy network might not lurk in shadows, but operate in plain sight, its covert mission hidden within the most ordinary of duties. The Barid demonstrated that to control a vast territory, you did not just need to send messages, you needed to collect the truth. Far to the east, a storm was gathering, one built on speed and secrets. The Mongol Empire's terrifying conquests were not just a triumph of the bow and the horse, but of information. Genghis Khan understood that to conquer the world, you first had to map it in your mind. His most powerful weapon was a sprawling, ruthless intelligence network that moved as fast as his cavalry. At the heart of this system were the Elchi, elite scouts who were the eyes of the Mongol horde. These riders could cover staggering distances, blending into the landscape to observe everything. They did not just count enemy soldiers, they memorized the lay of the land, the strength of city walls, the flow of rivers, and the moods of local rulers. A Mongol army never arrived blindly. It arrived with a detailed dossier of its enemies' every vulnerability. But the genius of the Mongol system was its breadth. They turned the entire Silk Road into an intelligence-gathering operation. Merchants, travelers, and diplomats moving along those ancient trade routes were unwitting sources of information. A trader complaining about a corrupt official in Bukhara, or a pilgrim describing political unrest in Persia, provided priceless pieces of a larger puzzle. The Mongols actively cultivated these contacts, realizing that the flow of goods and the flow of secrets were two sides of the same coin. Before a single arrow was fired in anger, they knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum chaos. Their devastating invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire is a perfect example. They did not see a unified kingdom, they saw a fractured state ripe for exploitation. Their spies had identified the deep rivalries between the Shah and his generals, and the Mongols expertly turned these divisions into a weapon, defeating a larger, more established army piece by piece. This was not brute force, it was a surgical strike guided by perfect intelligence. The Mongol scout on the horizon was not just a warning of attack, he was the final piece of a long and meticulous process of information gathering. This pragmatic, widespread approach to espionage reshaped the medieval world, proving that the empire who knew the most conquered the most. While the Mongols conquered with open terror, another empire was being built with quiet cunning. The island city of Venice had no vast lands or massive armies, only a labyrinth of canals and an even more complex web of secrets. Its survival depended not on the sword, but on the ledger and the whispered report. Governing this mercantile superpower was the Council of Ten, a shadowy committee that understood one fundamental truth: commerce was a form of warfare, and information was its most valuable currency. Their intelligence network was arguably the most sophisticated in the medieval world, woven directly into the fabric of the state itself. The key agents in this system were the Venetian ambassadors. Stationed in every major court from Constantinople to London, these men were far more than diplomats. They were master spymasters, trained observers who sent back meticulously detailed reports on everything they saw and heard. A casual comment from a French king about his treasury, a rumor of a new alliance between rival Italian cities, the arrival of a strange ship in an Egyptian port, all of it was carefully noted, encrypted, and dispatched back to the Doge. These reports, known as relazioni, were not simple letters. They were comprehensive intelligence briefings that gave the Venetian Senate an unparalleled window into the world. But the Council of Ten did not rely on ambassadors alone. They turned the entire Venetian trade fleet into a mobile spy network. Galley captains and merchants, the lifeblood of the Republic, had a dual loyalty. While they traded in silks and spices, they were also expected to gather information, their keen eyes noting fortifications, troop movements, and the gossip of foreign ports. A ship docking from Alexandria might carry more than just pepper. It might carry a vital piece of news about an impending Mamluk embargo. This constant flow of information allowed Venice to anticipate market shifts, negotiate crushing trade deals, and protect its fragile independence from much larger neighbors. This culture of surveillance even reached into the homes of ordinary Venetians. Scattered throughout the city were the Bocca di Leone, the lions' mouths. These were not mere ornaments, they were stone letterboxes with a grim purpose. Any citizen could slip an anonymous note into the gaping maw of the carved lion, denouncing a neighbor for treason, tax evasion, or conspiring against the state. It created a society where trust was a carefully measured commodity, and where the walls, it was said, had ears. Venice demonstrated that the greatest power could be wielded from a gilded chamber, not a battlefield. It perfected a model where espionage was not an occasional tool, but a permanent, institutionalized function of government, all in the relentless pursuit of profit and stability. Yet another network of whispers was being woven, not for gold or territory, but for the human soul. The medieval church, in its quest for universal orthodoxy, constructed one of the most pervasive surveillance systems the world had ever seen. While the Inquisition is remembered for its tribunals and trials, its true power originated long before any formal hearing, in a sprawling intelligence apparatus designed to uncover heresy. This was espionage in the name of faith, a system that turned every parish into a potential listening post and every believer into a potential informant. At the heart of this operation were the inquisitors themselves, men like Bernard Gouy, who were less priests and more master intelligence analysts. Gouy did not simply interrogate, he compiled. His manual for inquisitors was a detailed guide on detection, a systematic playbook for gathering, cross-referencing, and verifying information about a person's private beliefs and daily activities. He taught his followers how to spot inconsistencies in testimony, how to cultivate networks of informants, and how to piece together a case from the scattered whispers of a community. This network extended across all of Christendom, with bishops and local clergy acting as regional spy masters, funneling reports of suspicious behavior back to the papal authorities in Rome. The sheer reach of this system was its greatest strength. A careless comment about scripture made to a neighbor, a refusal to eat meat on a certain day, a secret meeting in a remote farmhouse, all of it could be noted, reported, and added to a growing dossier. The power of the Inquisition lay not merely in its ability to punish, but in its profound capacity to inspire fear and compel confession. It weaponized community itself, turning neighbor against neighbor and friend against friend in a self-policing nightmare. Can you envision the tension in a village where you could not trust the person sitting next to you in church? This was a form of espionage focused entirely on internal security and ideological control, proving that the most effective way to dominate a population is to monitor its thoughts. The methods of the Inquisition, for all their controversy, represent a chillingly efficient fusion of judicial process and intelligence operations. It demonstrated with terrifying clarity how a powerful institution could leverage faith, fear, and information to create a grid of surveillance that reached into the most intimate corners of daily life. While the great spy networks cast wide nets, the most vital secrets often traveled in the hands of a single person. The diplomatic courier was far more than a simple messenger. He was a mobile intelligence asset operating under the most valuable cover of all, official legitimacy. Chosen for their unwavering discretion, proven loyalty, and deep knowledge of foreign languages and treacherous routes, these individuals were the human backbone of international relations. A courier dispatched to deliver a sealed peace treaty between the kings of France and England carried more than just parchment. His formal instructions might be accompanied by a quiet, verbal command to observe everything. He was to note the condition of the roads and bridges, gauge the morale of the local garrisons he passed, and linger in taverns to catch the drift of public gossip. All of this mundane information, when pieced together back at court, painted a vivid picture of a rival kingdom's true strength and stability. Their status as protected envoys granted them a unique freedom of movement, allowing them to operate in plain sight where a common spy would be immediately suspect. This immunity was their greatest weapon, but with this trust came immense risk. The safety of the messages they carried was paramount, leading to ingenious methods of security. Letters were sealed with complex wax sigils designed to shatter if tampered with. Some were written in intricate codes or ciphers, while others were hidden in false bottomed chests or even sewn into the linings of their cloaks. For the most sensitive information, the courier was expected to commit the entire message to memory, becoming a living, breathing document who could not be physically intercepted. This absolute reliance on a trusted individual highlights a fundamental truth of medieval intelligence. In an age before digital encryption and instant communication, the entire system hinged on the character of the person holding the secret. A courier's courage, sharp mind, and loyalty were the only locks on a kingdom's most dangerous truths. Every journey was a mission, and every trusted traveler was a potential source of strategic insight, proving that the fate of empires could literally ride on one man's ability to keep a secret. A sealed letter was a fortress, and its cipher was the lock. In this world of whispers, the physical message was only half the battle. The real contest was in the code itself, a silent duel of intellect between the writer and any prying eyes. Medieval cryptography began with elegant simplicity. The substitution cipher was the most common tool, a system where each letter of the alphabet was swapped for another or for an arbitrary symbol. A diplomat from Florence writing to an ally in Milan might render his words into a baffling grid of shapes, confident that only someone with the identical cipher key could reassemble the true meaning. This was effective for routine dispatches, but as the stakes grew higher, so did the complexity of the codes. Mary, Queen of Scots, learned this lesson with tragic finality. Her secret correspondence plotting against Queen Elizabeth I used a sophisticated cipher with dozens of symbols representing letters, whole words, and even nulls designed to confuse the reader. It was a strong system for its time, but its security was its ultimate weakness. The sheer complexity required multiple people to possess the key, creating fatal points of failure. When Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, intercepted Mary's letters, his own team of codebreakers painstakingly unpicked the cipher. The decrypted messages became the very evidence that sent a queen to the executioner's block, a stark reminder that a code was only as secure as the people who held it secret. This constant push and pull between making codes and breaking them fueled an intellectual arms race. In quiet monastic scriptoria, learned monks pored over intercepted messages, using logic and pattern recognition to unravel the ciphers of rival kingdoms. Their work was slow, meticulous, and often driven by political or religious allegiance. Meanwhile, scholars in the Islamic world were making revolutionary advances. Thinkers like the polymath al-Kindi formally documented the science of frequency analysis. He realized that in any language, certain letters appear more often than others. By calculating how frequently a particular symbol showed up in a coded text, a cryptanalyst could begin to match it to common letters like E or T, systematically cracking the cipher from the inside out. This was no longer guesswork, it was a mathematical method that turned code breaking into a true science. For messages that dared not even appear to exist, there was another layer of deception: invisible ink. A seemingly blank piece of parchment or an innocent personal letter could hold a world of secrets. Spies used readily available substances like lemon juice, milk, or even onion juice to write between the lines. The message would remain completely invisible as it dried, only revealing itself when gently warmed by a candle flame or a stove. This allowed an agent to send a full, detailed report hidden in plain sight within an utterly mundane communication. The carrier could feign ignorance if caught, and the message would be destroyed simply by being read. These methods, from simple ciphers to hidden inks, were not foolproof, but together they transformed communication into a high-stakes game of intellectual combat. Every sealed letter was a challenge, and every decoded message was a victory in the silent war that shaped kingdoms. In this hall of mirrors, the most dangerous weapon was a convincing lie. Double agents were the ultimate expression of this deceit, individuals who wore loyalty as a mask, selling their services to the highest bidder or the most convincing threat. A baron's most trusted knight, for instance, might listen intently to plans for rebellion, all the while composing a secret report to the very king the baron plotted against. His fealty was a performance, his information a poisoned gift designed to lead his unsuspecting lord into a trap. The stakes for this game were unimaginably high. Success meant wealth and royal favor, but discovery meant a very public and brutal end on the executioner's block, a traitor's death that served as a grim warning to others. Beyond the court, this art of deception was perfected on the battlefield. Commanders understood that misleading an enemy could be more effective than outnumbering him. Before the famous Battle of Agincourt, English forces reportedly allowed captured French scouts to escape, having first fed them wildly exaggerated tales of sickness and starvation within the English ranks. These false deserters, carefully planted, carried a story of weakness that encouraged the French to attack with overconfidence straight into a carefully prepared killing ground. The intelligence was a lure, and the resulting victory was forged not just by English longbows, but by a brilliantly executed lie. This constant, swirling current of misinformation bred a climate of deep-seated paranoia in royal courts and military camps alike. A whispered warning from a trusted counselor, a letter from a distant ally, even the cheerful news of a victory, all had to be weighed and measured for the possibility of deception. Could you truly trust the man who had fought beside you for years, or was he patiently waiting for the right moment to betray you for a richer prize? This transformed espionage from a simple exchange of secrets into a profound psychological contest. The master spymaster was not just a collector of information, but a puppeteer of human emotion, expertly pulling the strings of greed, ambition, and fear. He knew that to control what your enemy believed was to control the battlefield itself. In the silent war of shadows, the most powerful kingdom was not always the one with the most soldiers, but the one that held the monopoly on the truth. This long and bitter struggle between England and France became a crucible for the dark arts of intelligence. For over a century, the conflict was not merely a series of battles, but a sprawling, silent war fought in the shadows of both kingdoms. English kings ruling from afar depended on a constant stream of whispers from the continent. Their spies, embedded in French towns and ports, were not just watching armies. They were listening for the subtle cracks in the Valois monarchy's authority, reporting on noble discontent, popular unrest, and any sign that the French crown was financially or politically vulnerable. This was strategic intelligence at its most potent, aiming to weaken the enemy from within long before their knights ever met on the field. The French, fighting on their own soil, adapted with different tactics. Their agents haunted English port towns, carefully noting the comings and goings of supply ships, the construction of new vessels, and the gathering of troops. This maritime intelligence was their early warning system, a way to anticipate the next English invasion and prepare their defenses, but their efforts reached even further. In regions like Gascony, which had long been held by the English crown, French operatives worked tirelessly to stoke the fires of rebellion, convincing local lords that their future lay with Paris, not London. This was a war for hearts and minds, fought with promises and propaganda. Perhaps the most famous target of these shadow campaigns was the Maid of Orleans herself. Joan of Arc's stunning victories were a catastrophic intelligence failure for the English. In response, they mounted a relentless campaign to destroy her credibility, not with swords but with information. They sought out captured letters, interrogated her former comrades, and spread disinformation to paint her as a heretic or a witch, believing that to shatter her divine aura was to break the French spirit. The war also introduced a more modern form of subterfuge, economic espionage. Both sides recognized that an enemy's treasury was as vital as its army. Agents worked to disrupt trade routes, sabotage financial deals with Italian bankers, and create artificial shortages that could cripple a kingdom's ability to pay its soldiers. Every piece of information, from the location of a grain shipment to the mood of a mercenary captain, became a piece in this grand strategic puzzle. The outcome of battles and the terms of treaties were repeatedly shaped by what was known, or what was cleverly misrepresented, in the secret councils of power. The 100 Years' War did not just create spies, it professionalized them. It proved that in a prolonged conflict, a well-funded, organized intelligence service was not a luxury, but a necessity for survival. This era cemented a fundamental truth that the fate of nations could be decided not only by the strength of a charge, but by the contents of a stolen letter. The clash of Crusader and Saracen on the dusty plains of the Holy Land did more than reshape borders. It shattered the insular world of European espionage. Knights who had arrived with little more than brute force and fervent belief found themselves outmatched not just by skilled warriors, but by a superior intelligence culture. They encountered the highly refined spy networks of the Seljuk Turks and the Ayyubid dynasty, systems that made their own methods seem primitive by comparison. Muslim leaders like the legendary Saladin were not just brilliant commanders, they were master spy masters. His campaigns were guided by flawless information, fed by networks of swift Bedouin scouts who knew every desert track and by countless informants planted within the very walls of Crusader cities. A Frankish lord's boast in Acre about low supplies or internal squabbles could be in Saladin's war council within days, allowing him to strike with devastating precision. This was a brutal and effective education for the Europeans, a forced lesson in the art of covert warfare. They began to adopt these new methods, bringing back knowledge of complex Eastern cryptography, sophisticated signaling systems, and the terrifying concept of politically motivated assassins, inspired by the feared Hashashin. This cross-pollination of shadowy techniques was not a one-way street. The military orders born from the conflict, particularly the Knights Templar, evolved into something far beyond a simple brotherhood of warriors. To protect the streams of pilgrims and manage their vast, unprecedented financial empire, the Templars built their own sophisticated intelligence capability. Their preceptories, scattered from Paris to Jerusalem, functioned as secure relay stations for information, their brother knights acting as couriers, observers, and analysts. They became an early transnational intelligence agency, their network so trusted that kings would use them to transfer treasure and secrets alike. The Crusades, in their bloody wake, effectively globalized medieval espionage. They broke down centuries of regional isolation, forcing East and West to learn from one another's darkest arts. This period was a crucible of innovation, proving that even amid the most bitter religious conflict, the silent trade in secrets flourishes, forever changing the rules of the shadow game. Behind the grand narratives of kings and conquerors moved another kind of agent, one history often rendered invisible. Women were not merely bystanders in the world of medieval espionage. They were its unseen architects, wielding a form of power that operated in the spaces men could not easily access. A noblewoman like Elena of Aquitaine, presiding over her court in Poitiers, was surrounded by a constant hum of political chatter. Her seemingly social gatherings were intelligence gold mines, where confident boasts from visiting knights or whispered anxieties from courtiers were carefully filed away in her memory. Because women were often dismissed as politically inconsequential, they could listen without seeming to, gathering the most sensitive secrets while appearing to focus on matters of patronage or poetry. This perceived neutrality was their greatest weapon. A queen like Isabella of France, married to the English King Edward II, used her position as a diplomatic bride to devastating effect. While officially a symbol of alliance, she became the center of a covert network, communicating with her brother, the King of France, and with disaffected English barons. Her royal status provided the perfect cover for movements and messages that would have been treasonous for anyone else, ultimately allowing her to orchestrate her husband's overthrow. These women did not need to steal documents from a locked chest. The secrets were delivered to them in casual conversation, and their influence was often the glue that held fragile conspiracies together. Far from the glittering courts, women in taverns and great households held a different kind of power. The woman serving ale to a group of garrison soldiers or managing a busy inn near a port heard everything. Soldiers, their tongues loosened by drink, would complain about their pay, their commanders, or the readiness of the local defenses. Merchants, boasting of their travels, might let slip news of troop movements seen on distant roads. A servant in a bishop's household could note the arrival of a secret envoy or overhear a heated argument about church policy. These women were the ultimate unobtrusive observers, their presence so ordinary it became a form of camouflage, allowing them to collect a steady stream of tactical intelligence that fed directly into the decisions of spymasters and rulers. Perhaps one of the most potent examples of this soft power was Matilda of Tuscany. During the brutal investiture controversy, a power struggle between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, she used her vast lands and political influence as a base of operations for the papal cause. Her castles became secure way stations for papal messengers, and her deep knowledge of Italian politics allowed her to serve as a key advisor and intelligence source for Pope Gregory VII. She did not command armies in the field, but she commanded the flow of information, proving that control over knowledge could be as decisive as control over territory. The story of these female operatives forces us to redefine the very image of a medieval spy. It was not always a shadowy figure in a cloak, but could be a queen offering a sympathetic ear, a tavern keeper refilling a mug, or a countess hosting a musical evening. Their contributions reveal that the most effective intelligence network was often the one nobody thought to look for, operating in plain sight, powered by the influence and access that only women could possess. A king's most valuable spy was useless without a purse full of gold to pay him. The shadow networks that shaped kingdoms were not built on loyalty alone. They were expensive, sophisticated machines that demanded a constant flow of money. Funding a secret service was one of the heaviest burdens on a medieval treasury. A ruler had to pay his informants, often handsomely, to ensure their silence and cooperation. He had to rent or purchase safe houses in hostile cities, discreet locations where agents could meet, rest, and exchange information away from prying eyes. Every covert mission, from bribing a castle guard to financing a long-term deep-cover operative in a rival court, required a dedicated stream of resources. This was not a trivial expense. It was a major line item in the royal budget, viewed as an absolute necessity for the survival of the state itself. Kings routinely diverted funds meant for public works or even their own armies to feed their intelligence apparatus, understanding that a single piece of well-paid for information could save a kingdom from ruin. In some cases, they levied special taxes, quietly justified as being for the defense of the realm, with the gold flowing directly into the coffers of the spymaster. This created a powerful feedback loop, where successful intelligence operations secured more wealth and power for the crown, which in turn could fund an even larger and more effective spy network. But crowns were not the only players in this financial game. The great merchant guilds of cities like Genoa or the Hanseatic League operated their own extensive intelligence services. For them, espionage was not about national security, but about profit. They funded agents to scout new trade routes, to discover the secret sources of valuable commodities like silk or spices, and to learn about the arrival times of their competitors' ships. A guild with superior information could corner a market, negotiate crushing contracts, or avoid pirate-infested waters, turning secrets directly into silver. They used their far-flung trading posts as listening posts, creating a commercial intelligence web that rivaled the political ones of kings. The most sophisticated financial operators, however, were the military orders like the Knights Templar. Their international network of preceptories and their revolutionary banking system made them the perfect conduit for moving secret funds across Christendom. A French king needing to pay a spy in the Holy Land did not have to risk sending a chest of gold across bandit-ridden roads and through hostile territories. He could simply deposit the funds with the Templars in Paris and receive a letter of credit. His agent could then walk into a Templar house in Jerusalem and withdraw the exact amount, all without a single coin ever changing hands in the open. This made the Templars the world's first international intelligence financiers, their financial power enabling the shadow wars of others. The price of information itself was a constant negotiation. Bribery was the most common and direct tool in the spymaster's arsenal. The right amount of money could turn an enemy's most trusted courtier, open the gates of a fortified city, or secure the only copy of a vital treaty. The cost of betrayal was calibrated to the risk, with some secrets costing a small fortune. This entire economic ecosystem meant that a kingdom's wealth directly dictated the reach and power of its shadow networks. A rich state like Venice or France could afford a vast multi-layered intelligence service with agents in every major court. A poorer rival might only manage a handful of informants, leaving it dangerously blind to the plots unfolding beyond its borders. In the silent war of secrets, financial power was not just an advantage, it was the very fuel that kept the spies in the field and the whispers flowing back to the throne. A spy's most valuable weapon was not a blade but a small, flat piece of wood coated in wax. This simple wax tablet, paired with a stylus, allowed an agent to jot down a vital observation, a troop count, or a snippet of overheard conversation, then smooth the surface clean in an instant, leaving no physical evidence behind. It was the perfect tool for a profession that demanded perfect recall and perfect discretion. While stories favored daggers and poisons, the reality of fieldwork was far more mundane, built on a clever, practical arsenal designed for one purpose: to make the spy invisible. Disguise was the first line of defense. An agent would not skulk in a dark cloak but walk openly in the plain robes of a pilgrim, the fine clothes of a merchant, or the humble habit of a monk. These identities provided the ultimate cover, granting the freedom to travel great distances and linger in public spaces without raising an eyebrow. A merchant's pack could hide more than trade goods. It might conceal a set of delicate lock-picking tools, used not for treasure, but for silently opening the sealed chests that held a rival lord's correspondence. Once a secret was acquired, it had to be delivered. Elaborate signaling systems were developed for safe, silent communication. A specific pattern of laundry hung on a clothesline, a single candle placed in a particular window at dusk, or a mark chalked on a certain wall, all could relay a prearranged message, from all clear to abort the mission, without a single word being spoken. For longer journeys into unfamiliar territory, maps and compasses were lifelines. Though these maps were often fanciful, with sea monsters sketched in the oceans and cities drawn wildly out of place, they provided a rough guide to the world, helping an agent navigate treacherous mountain passes or locate a remote castle. The magnetic compass, a recent marvel, was a beacon of certainty on a cloudy night, ensuring a messenger carrying stolen plans could maintain his course toward friendly lines. Each of these tools, from the humble wax tablet to the ingenious signal, was a testament to the resourcefulness required in the shadows. They were the unsung heroes of espionage, the practical building blocks that turned a solitary individual into the eyes and ears of a kingdom. A spy caught in the enemy's camp knew his fate was sealed. In the stark logic of medieval justice, a captured agent was an outlaw, denied the rights of a prisoner of war, and often executed without trial. This was the public face of espionage, condemned as a dishonorable act, a violation of the chivalric ideals that supposedly governed noble conduct. A knight fought with an open visor, his loyalty and identity clear for all to see. A spy, by contrast, hid his true self, trading in deception. To be caught was to be branded a traitor to the very concept of honorable warfare. Yet this public condemnation masked a deep and universal hypocrisy. Every king who publicly hanged an enemy agent was, at that very moment, almost certainly funding a dozen of his own. Espionage was the great open secret of statecraft, a crime when practiced against the crown, but a necessary, if unspoken, duty when practiced for it. This created a profound legal limbo for the individuals who did the work. They operated without any legal protection, their survival dependent entirely on their anonymity and their master's willingness to deny any knowledge of their existence. If a mission failed, the spy was a convenient scapegoat, his death a political necessity. The Church, the moral arbiter of the age, was itself deeply conflicted. Some theologians argued that all deception was a sin, a violation of divine law that could not be justified. Others, however, crafted careful arguments that spying for the defense of Christendom or the stability of a Christian kingdom was a grim necessity, a lesser evil for a greater good. This moral gymnastics only deepened the ambiguity. Where did a spy's soul stand if his work was simultaneously a sin and a service? His entire profession placed him outside the conventional structures of society, a ghost in the machine of power. He could be richly rewarded in secret for the same actions that would see him publicly disgraced and killed. This dual standard reveals the core tension in the medieval mindset, a constant struggle between the lofty ideals of chivalry and the brutal, pragmatic demands of actually holding power. The spy was the living embodiment of that conflict, a necessary shadow in a world that pretended to live only in the light. For every masterful deception, there was a catastrophic misstep. The silent war of information was a double-edged sword, and when intelligence failed, the results could unravel an empire in a single day. The Byzantine Empire, for all its sophisticated spycraft, suffered one such devastating blow. In the year 1071, their armies marched to meet the Seljuk Turks at Manzikert. Byzantine agents had reported on the Turkish forces, but they fatally misjudged their cohesion and their leader's tactical genius. They expected a disorganized horde, not a unified and highly mobile army. The resulting defeat was not just a lost battle, it was a seismic event that shattered Byzantine power in Anatolia, opening the heart of the empire to invasion and triggering its long, slow decline. A similar miscalculation echoed centuries later in the misty hills of Scotland. The English king, Edward II, was confident his forces would crush the rebellion of Robert the Bruce. He had informants in Scotland, he received reports, yet his intelligence apparatus fundamentally failed to grasp the depth of Scottish resolve and the cleverness of their tactics. At Bannockburn in 1314, the English heavy cavalry advanced into a carefully prepared trap of hidden pits and tightly packed schiltrons, resulting in a stunning victory for the outnumbered Scots and securing Scottish independence for generations. The failure to understand the enemy's spirit proved just as fatal as not knowing their numbers. Perhaps the most shocking intelligence collapse was the sack of Constantinople itself in 1204. This was the Pearl Harbor of the medieval world. The Byzantine capital, a city with legendary defenses and its own extensive spy network, was utterly unprepared for an attack from an unexpected quarter, the armies of the Fourth Crusade. How could the Byzantines, with their eyes and ears across the known world, fail to see a massive fleet of crusaders turning against them? The failure was likely a perfect storm of diplomatic misreading, misplaced trust in Venetian intermediaries, and an inability to believe that fellow Christians would dare assault the greatest city in Christendom. The consequences were absolute. The city was brutally sacked, the empire was carved up, and a line of Byzantine emperors was forced into exile, a blow from which the empire never fully recovered. These disasters share common roots. A double agent feeding false information could poison an entire intelligence operation. A spy master might correctly gather every piece of the puzzle, but then assemble them into the wrong picture, seeing what he expected to see rather than what was actually there. Sometimes the enemy's operational security was simply too effective, their inner circle too loyal to penetrate. The price of these failures was measured not only in lost battles, but in fallen dynasties, redrawn maps, and centuries of political chaos. For every whisper that saved a kingdom, there was another that, if missed or misunderstood, could condemn it to ruin, a stark lesson in the immense weight carried by those who traded in secrets. The Black Death did not just empty villages, it shattered the very foundations of medieval society, and the world of shadows was forced to adapt. With the old feudal order crumbling, the ancient bonds of loyalty that tied a serf to his lord meant very little when the lord was dead and the serf was searching for food in the next county. This breakdown of the traditional hierarchy posed a massive problem for kings who had relied on these structures for information. A local baron could no longer be counted on to provide reliable reports from his lands because his lands were often empty. In this new, fractured world, rulers had no choice but to professionalize their spy networks. They turned increasingly to paid agents, mercenaries of information whose loyalty was guaranteed by a steady stream of silver, not by an oath sworn on a Bible. This marked a crucial shift, creating the first true career spies, men and women who worked not out of feudal duty but for a paycheck. This new professional class emerged from the chaos of a depopulated landscape. The survivors of the plague were suddenly and tragically mobile. People fled devastated cities, peasants abandoned their fallow fields to seek work elsewhere, and pilgrims traveled with a new desperation. This constant, churning movement created a perfect environment for recruitment. A spymaster in London could now find a potential informant from a plague-ravaged port in France, a man with no local ties and a desperate need for coin, who could blend into the anonymous crowds of a bustling city without raising suspicion. These rootless individuals became the perfect cogs in a new kind of intelligence machine, their very anonymity making them ideal for collecting secrets. Yet this same mobility also bred a terrifying new challenge, a plague of misinformation. The psychological trauma of the Black Death left deep scars of paranoia and fear. In a world where a neighbor's cough could be a death sentence, trust evaporated. Rumors spread with the speed of the disease itself, and every traveler was a potential carrier of both illness and dangerous falsehoods. For a spymaster, the task of sifting real intelligence from this chaotic noise became exponentially harder. A report of a nobleman's rebellion might be a genuine threat, or it might simply be the malicious gossip of a rival, weaponized by the pervasive atmosphere of suspicion. The job now required not just gathering secrets, but also becoming an expert in debunking lies. This new reality forced a fundamental change in the priorities of espionage. While watching rival armies was still important, the immediate threat to a kingdom was no longer just a foreign invasion, but internal collapse from starvation and economic chaos. Intelligence networks began to focus intently on economic stability. Agents were tasked with monitoring grain shipments across the Mediterranean, reporting on the price of wool in Flanders, and assessing the labor shortages in their own countryside. A king needed to know if a harvest had failed in a neighboring region, not to plan an attack, but to anticipate a flood of desperate refugees or to corner the market on scarce food supplies. The secret reports crossing a ruler's desk were now as likely to be about merchant guild debts and warehouse inventories as they were about castle garrisons. In the aftermath of the plague, espionage evolved from a sword wielded in war into a shield for a fragile recovery. The shadow networks, in their relentless pursuit of information, became a vital tool for social and economic control, helping to piece broken kingdoms back together. This adaptation in the face of utter catastrophe reveals a profound truth about power, that the most resilient systems are not the strongest, but the most flexible, able to transform their very purpose to meet the demands of a changed world. A monastery's silence was a perfect cloak for the world's noise. These secluded communities, often perched on remote hilltops or nestled at crucial river crossings, became the medieval world's most unexpected intelligence hubs. While their primary purpose was prayer and contemplation, their daily functions made them natural centers for information. As the primary centers of literacy, monasteries were where knowledge was recorded, translated, and preserved. Monks were the era's scribes and chroniclers, and this gave them unparalleled access. A bishop's confidential letter, a king's tax record, or a merchant's last will and testament would all pass through their hands. In the quiet of the scriptorium, a monk copying a religious text might also be discreetly duplicating a sensitive political document, or even composing an encrypted message for a local lord, his holy work providing the perfect cover for clandestine activity. The constant stream of pilgrims was the monastery's lifeblood of intelligence. Travelers arriving from Rome, Paris, or Jerusalem brought with them more than just relics. They carried the latest news, gossip, and rumors from across the known world. An astute abbot, listening to the tales of these weary visitors over a shared meal, could piece together a detailed picture of distant political stability, military readiness, or economic hardship. This gathered intelligence was a valuable commodity, which abbots often reported upward to their bishop or even directly to a secular ruler, trading spiritual favor for political protection. The vast landholdings of monastic orders, stretching across remote border regions, further enhanced their strategic value. A monastery on the frontier between England and Scotland, for instance, was perfectly positioned to observe troop movements and report on local loyalties, all while appearing to be a neutral spiritual sanctuary. This very neutrality, however, was often a fragile illusion. During the bitter power struggles between the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor, monasteries were frequently caught in the middle. An abbey's loyalty and the sensitive information it held became a prize fiercely contested by both sides. Emperors would pressure abbots to reveal papal plans, while papal legates would demand intelligence on imperial sympathizers. The monastic network, with its reach into every corner of Christendom, functioned as a passive but incredibly pervasive intelligence asset. It was woven so deeply into the fabric of society that its role in the shadow game was almost invisible, proving that the most effective spies were sometimes those who never left their cloisters. A whisper could be as deadly as a blade, and the line between gathering secrets and arranging a murder was often vanishingly thin. Political assassination represented the ultimate, most brutal application of intelligence, a dark synergy where espionage provided the map and murder followed the route. The most feared masters of this craft were the Nizari Ismailis, a sect known to history as the Assassins. From their remote mountain fortresses in Persia and Syria, they did not wage conventional war. Instead, they wielded psychological terror with surgical precision. Their success depended entirely on a sophisticated intelligence network that infiltrated the courts and camps of their enemies. Before a dagger ever found its mark, their spies had spent months, sometimes years, observing a target. They learned his daily routine, the layout of his private chambers, the identities of his most trusted guards, and even his personal superstitions. This meticulous information transformed a simple killing into a devastating political statement. The death of a prominent Sunni leader or a Crusader noble was not just a loss of life, it was a deliberate strike at the heart of an enemy's morale, a chilling demonstration that no one, no matter how powerful, was safe. In Europe, where such systematic campaigns were less common, the interplay of intelligence and murder still surfaced in shocking ways. The brutal killing of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, inside his own cathedral in 1170, sent tremors across Christendom. While the 4 knights who carried out the act were driven by a fiery, perhaps manipulated, sense of loyalty to King Henry II, their success relied on specific knowledge. They knew exactly where to find Becket, they understood the vulnerabilities of the cathedral's security, and they moved with a confidence that suggests they had been briefed on his habits and the layout of the building. This was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a targeted strike made possible by information. The constant threat of such an attack forced rulers to invest heavily in counterintelligence. The same networks used to uncover enemy plans were now tasked with protecting the king's own life. A spymaster's value was measured not only by the secrets he stole, but by the assassinations he prevented. This created a pervasive climate of fear that could paralyze a government, making advisors hesitant to speak freely and rulers afraid to appear in public. In the grim calculus of medieval power, knowing who to kill and how was just as critical as knowing when to negotiate. The shadow of the dagger was always present, cast by the lamp of the spy. The whispers of medieval spies did not fade with the coming of a new age. They simply found new patrons and a new sophistication in the glittering courts of the Renaissance. The Italian city-states, locked in perpetual rivalry, became laboratories for perfecting the dark arts of statecraft. Venice's Council of Ten continued to operate its legendary web of ambassadors and informants, while in Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli distilled centuries of covert practice into a chillingly pragmatic philosophy. In his famous work, The Prince, he argued that a ruler must be both a lion and a fox, and that the effective use of deception and intelligence was not just acceptable, but essential for maintaining power. This was no longer a suggestion, it was a formal doctrine, a direct intellectual inheritance from the shadow wars of the previous era. As smaller feudal domains consolidated into powerful nation-states like Spain, France, and England, their rulers realized that the ad hoc spy networks of their ancestors were no longer sufficient. They began to build more formalized institutions. Cipher offices staffed by full-time codebreakers became a standard part of the royal administration. Foreign services evolved, with ambassadors now expected to function as permanent, resident spymasters in the courts of their rivals, their diplomatic immunity providing the perfect long-term cover for intelligence gathering. This was the true professionalization of the craft, turning espionage from a collection of individual missions into a continuous, state-funded enterprise. Even the revolutionary invention of the printing press, which threatened secrecy by allowing information to spread more widely, was co-opted by the intelligence community. Manuals on cryptography and tradecraft could now be printed and studied, standardizing knowledge that had once been the secret domain of a few masters. The medieval experience had taught a brutal but clear lesson. In a world growing ever more connected through trade and exploration, a permanent, professional intelligence capability was the ultimate insurance policy for a kingdom's survival. The shadow networks that once served medieval kings did not disappear. They simply put on Renaissance finery and went to work building the modern world of state secrets. For every lock, a key was forged, and for every spy, a hunter waited in the dark. The relentless expansion of shadow networks inevitably spawned its own counterforce, a world of medieval counterintelligence built on suspicion and ingenious defense. A king's inner circle became his first line of defense, guarded by more than just knights with swords. Trusted bodyguards and chamberlains were the ultimate gatekeepers, their true duty extending far beyond physical protection. They were human filters, trained to scrutinize every visitor, to note a nervous glance or an overly curious question, and to vet every new servant or courtier for signs of deception. Their constant presence created a living shield, a barrier of loyalty designed to sniff out the infiltrator before they could ever reach the throne. This defensive mindset even shaped the very stone of the castles themselves. The iconic spiral staircases that wound their way up castle towers were not merely architectural whims, they were carefully engineered death traps. Built almost always to ascend in a clockwise direction, they gave a tremendous advantage to a right-handed defender standing above. Any right-handed attacker climbing the stairs would find their sword arm cramped against the central stone column, while the defender above could swing freely. And those ominous holes in the ceilings of gateways and passages, known chillingly as murder holes, were not just for pouring boiling oil on siege engines. They were permanent surveillance points, allowing guards to observe, challenge, and control anyone moving through the castle's arteries, turning the fortress itself into a massive counterintelligence device designed to monitor and manage the flow of people and of secrets. The protection of information required its own strict rituals. The handling of sensitive documents was governed by meticulous protocols. A lord's personal seal, pressed into warm wax, was more than a signature, it was a tamper-proof lock. A broken seal was an immediate alarm bell, signaling that a message had been compromised. The most dangerous papers, treaties with secret clauses, lists of informants, or reports on noble loyalties, were kept in secret archives, often accessible only to the ruler and a single sworn aide. This was the birth of the classified document, a physical secret that had to be guarded as fiercely as a strongroom full of gold. Perhaps the most subtle tool of counter-espionage was the practice of hostaging. When a noble from a subjugated or allied territory was required to live at the royal court, it was presented as an honor. In reality, it was a sophisticated form of surveillance. These guests were living guarantees of their family's good behavior, but they were also invaluable intelligence assets, kept under the constant, watchful eye of the king's agents. Their conversations were monitored, their correspondence read, and their visitors noted. A homesick comment or a whispered complaint could reveal brewing discontent back in their homeland, providing the crown with a crucial early warning of rebellion. This entire paranoid apparatus of defense, from the loyal chamberlain to the gilded prisoner, was a direct and necessary response to the invisible enemy at the gates. It created a climate of perpetual vigilance, an endless arms race where for every new method of espionage, a new form of protection had to be invented, locking the medieval world in a silent struggle that raged within its own walls. A spy's greatest enemy was not the rival agent across the courtyard, but the relentless strain inside his own mind. To survive, these men and women had to construct a second life, a complete fiction they inhabited every waking moment. A merchant selling fine cloth in a foreign city could not slip, not even in his sleep. He had to know his fake hometown streets, remember the names of his invented family, and laugh at local jokes he did not truly understand. This constant performance could fracture a person's very sense of self, leaving them to wonder who they really were beneath the layers of lies. The fear was a constant companion, a cold dread that sharpened every sense. A lingering glance from a guard, an unexpected question from a friendly innkeeper, the sound of heavy footsteps outside a door at night, any of these could signal the end. The knowledge of what followed capture, the public torture, and the brutal execution designed to terrify others, meant that every day was a tightrope walk over a pit of unimaginable pain. This was not a life of thrilling adventure, but one of corrosive, unending anxiety. For many, the most painful wound was the isolation. They moved through crowded marketplaces and lively feast halls, yet they were utterly alone. They could not share their fears with a spouse, boast of a success to an old friend, or seek comfort from a priest. To protect their mission and their loved ones from reprisal, they had to sever their most human connections, building walls not just around their secrets, but around their hearts. This enforced solitude often led to a deep moral injury. A spy might be ordered to befriend a local official, sharing meals and earning genuine trust, only to later use that friendship to plant evidence that would see the man hanged. They manipulated allies, broke solemn oaths, and witnessed atrocities they were powerless to stop, all for a cause that seemed distant and abstract. The very skills that kept them alive, their duplicity and emotional detachment, slowly hollowed them out from the inside. They became instruments of state power, their own morals and sympathies sanded away by the demands of their work. What was the personal cost of a kingdom's security? It was measured in the silent screams of a man betraying a friend, in the sleepless nights of a woman who could not remember her own childhood, and in the shattered humanity of those who lived so long in the shadows that they became part of the darkness itself. The medieval spy of our imagination is a creature of thrilling fiction, not gritty historical fact. Popular films and novels have painted a picture of a glamorous lone operative, a master of disguise who can win a sword fight and seduce a queen in the same evening. The truth is far more ordinary and in its own way far more fascinating. Most medieval agents were not swashbuckling adventurers. They were bureaucrats hunched over financial records, merchants haggling over the price of wool, or pious clerics copying manuscripts. Their power came not from a hidden blade, but from their utterly unremarkable appearance, their perfect camouflage within the daily rhythms of society. A tax collector traveling from village to village had a legitimate reason to ask probing questions and observe the defenses of a local lord's castle. A monk relaying a message from a distant abbey could carry a secret dispatch without anyone suspecting the holy man. This was the reality of the craft, leveraging mundane occupations for covert purposes. The idea of a vast, all-seeing spy network, a medieval version of an intelligence agency with files on every citizen, is another dramatic exaggeration. In reality, these networks were often patchwork quilts of informants, some reliable, many not. They were deeply dependent on the individual skill, courage, and sometimes the sheer luck of a single agent. A network was only as strong as its weakest informant, and a single double agent or a poorly memorized message could collapse an entire operation. While stories of political assassinations capture our attention, they were the exception, not the rule. The real work was profoundly unglamorous. It involved days spent in a dusty town square, listening to the gossip of soldiers, or weeks traveling dangerous roads to deliver a single, vital piece of information about crop yields or a noble's debt. This steady, relentless drip of mundane intelligence was what truly shaped policy and secured thrones. The technological tools were equally humble. There were no miniature cameras or electronic listening devices. A spy's kit consisted of a wax tablet for temporary notes, a good memory, and the courage to sometimes conceal a tiny, coded scrap of parchment in the sole of a boot. The notion of a license to kill is almost entirely a modern invention. Medieval rulers were often deeply hesitant to authorize murder, understanding that the political fallout from an assassination could be far more damaging than the existence of the target. It was far more valuable to use gathered intelligence to blackmail a rival into submission, outmaneuver him in diplomacy, or bankrupt him through economic sabotage. Unraveling these myths does not make the story less compelling. It does the opposite. It replaces a fantasy figure with a real, vulnerable human being whose success relied on wit, patience, and a profound understanding of human nature, not on fictional gadgets or supernatural combat skills. Power was never truly about the clash of steel on the battlefield. It was about the whisper that prevented the battle from ever beginning. Our journey through these shadowy corridors reveals a world where information itself was the ultimate currency, a form of wealth more decisive than any chest of gold or silver. The silent, relentless work of spies did not just influence events. It actively shaped the very destiny of kingdoms, building some and breaking others from the inside out. We have walked the halls of Byzantine bureaucracy, ridden with the swift couriers of the Abbasid Barid, and navigated the merchant-filled canals of Venice. We have witnessed the terrifying efficiency of Mongol scouts and felt the chilling reach of the Inquisition. These were not isolated curiosities. They were the diverse and brutally adaptable nervous systems of empires, proving that there was no single model for control, only a universal need to know more than your rival. We have held the spy's humble wax tablet and felt the psychological weight of a life lived in lies. We have seen kingdoms saved by a single, well-timed piece of intelligence and empires crumble because of one catastrophic misjudgment. These shadow networks were not a side note to the history of knights and castles. They were a central, driving force in the rise and fall of civilizations, intricately woven into the fabric of warfare, diplomacy, and the earliest structures of the state itself. The lessons from this distant era echo with startling clarity in our own information-saturated age. They speak to the eternal value of knowledge, the fragile nature of trust, and the profound ethical dilemmas that arise whenever we choose to operate in the shadows for a perceived greater good. History is and always has been a tapestry woven by both the seen and the unseen. The stories of these hidden architects of power remind us that the full truth of the past is often waiting just beneath the surface, ready to be uncovered. If this exploration into the hidden forces that shaped our world has captivated you, there are many more secrets waiting in the archives of history. We would be honored to have you subscribe and join us for our next deep dive. And we are truly curious, which of these medieval spy networks did you find the most formidable or fascinating? Was it the institutional might of Byzantium, the commercial cunning of Venice, or the terrifying speed of the Mongols? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.